When I was in high school, we lived near the beach. And so it seemed like just about every other Saturday would end up on the beach playing football or soccer until it got dark. And then sure enough, when the sun was setting, just about every time we're there, somebody would grab some logs and start a fire on the beach. And as soon as that fire starts, for some reason, it sucks you in and everybody would gather around. You'd hang out until the one guy, it always seemed like there was the one guy who had a guitar in his trunk, and he'd bring a guitar over, and then everyone would gather around. And he would start singing songs like John Denver's Rocky Mountain High and that kind of thing. And it was just, when you gather around, it's an incredible moment that it creates for some reason, especially around a campfire when it's dark by the beach. But then there was one thing I will say that always bothered me, is that it seemed like, the cool guy with the guitar, when he sat down and would start playing, the high school girls always tended to crowd around that guy with the guitar. So finally, my sophomore year of high school, I told my parents at Christmas, I need a guitar. I need a guitar too. I was so horrible, I never busted it out, but the point was, I had a guitar. When you gather around, I think with friends, something happens. That's one of the reasons that we created this space, you could say, in the round, so that you can gather around. We can gather around with friends. I hope when you look across the room, you go, oh, I haven't seen her in a while. Oh, I recognize him. I've seen him at the gym, and you go find him afterwards, you just say, hey, dude, you don't know his name, but that's okay. But when you gather around, you start to connect with people like we try to do here. Well, the Bible has a great gather round story. Open up your Bibles to Luke chapter 5, and we read this about Jesus and some people who gathered around. One day Jesus was teaching, and Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal the sick. And some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. So this story, the story is about a man, and it's a man who has not just one problem, but two problems. We read that this man is paralyzed, and not only does he have this physical disability, but in Jesus' day, in first century Israel, for the Jew, your physical problems were a picture of your spiritual problems. Obviously, God was punishing you because of some huge sin in your life, and that's why you can't walk. And so this man had a sin problem and he had a physical problem, and he's stuck on a mat. Now he hears, though, that a rabbi is coming to town, and we read in the passage that everyone knew God had given Jesus power to heal the sick. So the man on the mat, he wants to make it to Jesus. There's just one problem. His life is limited to a mat about the size of this rug here, about 3 by 6, and that's his life. He can't get to where Jesus is. Let me just pause here for a minute, because I think the mat in the story teaches us something. I think in many ways, all of us have a mat. Some of us hide our mats better than others, but today I want to talk about the mat as a picture, as a symbol of the problems that all of us carry around in our lives. The mat is a picture of your issues. It could be the picture, a symbol of your failures. It could be a picture of your past mistakes, the way you've let other people down or the way you've let God down. It could be a picture of your destructive habits that are hurting your life right now. All of us have a mat. Some people do a better job hiding their mat than others, but I think everybody has a mat. And our mats come in all shapes and sizes, don't they? Yours might come in the shape of a raging temper. Yours might come in the shape of dishonesty and deceit that has hurt people around you. Your mat may come in the form of an addiction, but all of us have our mats. They say that some people can spend a lifetime doing what I'll call today mat management, trying to hide it so that other people don't see it. Because think about it. We all know that if somebody sees this mat that represents all my weaknesses, they're gonna like me less. But if I can hide my mat, then maybe people will like me and let me in and be a part of their lives. So this man's mat, though, everybody sees his mat. The man in the story. His mat is 3 feet by 6 feet wide, tall. Everybody sees that he has an issue. but he has some friends in spite of it. And so he says to his circle of friends these simple words, carry me. Now, in our culture, we don't say those words very much, do we? We don't say carry me to anybody, really. Where I grew up in Africa, though, people said carry me all the time. It's a very common Liberian phrase to say, and they would usually say, carry me halfway. They would say halfway just to be polite. You knew they wanted, and that meant come and walk with me. It was an invitation, come and spend time with me. Or as a kid, when it's getting dark and your house is through the jungle a mile or two, and you know there's crocodiles and boa constrictors in the swamp and the witch doctor and the heart man, then you say to your friends, carry me. I really need some friends around me. And your friends would come around and they would carry you, not just halfway, they would walk with you all the way. It's a very relational invitation, this carry me. And that's exactly what this man says to his friends. He says, carry me. And so we read here of his friends who gather round, and it had to be at least 4. It could have been 6, but they all take an edge of the mat, and when they circle around him and they lift him up. We could call it, last week we talked about how the English word fellowship is from the Greek koinonia. Koinonia means fellowship. We could call this the koinonia of the mat, or we could call it the koinonia of the ring, or in English that'd be the fellowship of the ring. Thank you very much. We'll just pause. We'll just take a moment there. That was good. All right, okay. So hope that sinks in. It doesn't matter. So his friends gather around, and my point here, and really the point and the lesson of this story is that if you have a mat, and we all have them, in community that is Christian, you will have friends who will gather around and pick you up. And maybe you've never been in a community like this before, but in this kind of community that we're trying to grow at the Grove, you will find friends who will gather around and lift you up, especially when life gets hard. Well, here's a second thought that I want to pull from this text, and it's this. In community, outsiders become insiders. So go back to verse 18. And we read that they, his friends, had tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus, but they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd. So there's a crowd in this house. They blocked every window, every door, and the man on the mat is on the outside trying to get inside, and nobody will part their shoulders to let him in. Maybe they don't want him in because they see that he has a physical issue, and that represents his spiritual issue, and they don't want him anywhere near him. And maybe you've experienced that in your life. Maybe there was a gathering of friends, or maybe you started a new job and you wanted, like anything, to be in this circle of friends, and people seemed to keep you out and nobody seemed to want you there. Maybe you moved into a neighborhood and nobody would return your gestures of friendship. When that happens, it hurts, doesn't it? In his book, Soul Cravings, Erwin McManus, he writes this: all of us know how cold it is on the outside. It's almost unbearable out there, especially when you're there alone, isolated, lonely. You were never meant to be alone. And that's what it feels like when you're trying to get to the inside. And then C.S. Lewis wrote this short article, this essay, and it's titled The Inner Ring. And he writes about the antisocial forces in this world where people keep each other out. He says, I believe that in all men's or all people's lives, one of the most dominant elements is a desire to be inside the ring and the terror of being left on the outside. And in the essay, The Inner Ring, he writes about an onion. And he said, so often we see a group of people and we think, I want to be inside that circle of friends. And then you think you've broken to, only to discover there's another ring, like the rings of an onion. And you break through the next one, and then you discover there's another ring. There's an inner ring. And it gets worse and worse. Those are antisocial forces at work, and they're everywhere. But in Christian community that is Christian, everyone that is outside is wanted on the inside. I hope you don't miss that this morning, that no matter what's been happening in your life, you're always wanted in this place. There are some churches, though, and I've been there, where it doesn't feel like that. So we're trying to change that narrative at the Grove. I'll just share one example. I'm not going to name the church, but this was in another state. When Veronica and I first got married, we lived in LA, and we had heard about this church that was blowing up. It was the hottest church in town, so we said, hey, let's go try it. So we drive to church, and we get there, and we're rushing through the courtyard, through the lobby, and we get to the auditorium. And we're a little late, maybe 5 minutes late, but as we're coming in, there's two ushers standing at the doorway, or as I said last week, we should call them bouncers. And the bouncers are standing there, and they said, stop, you cannot come in. I go, what? What do you mean I can't come in? They said, you're late, you can't come in. And I'm like, well, who's not late to church? I mean, look at you people sitting here. I'm gonna say, when we started, I mean, maybe there were 5 or 10 of you here. Everybody's late to church. We were just maybe like 5 minutes late, respectably late. Most of you come in around 12 to 18 minutes late. That's Grove late. We see you. You're trying to sneak in, but we see you. But it's okay. We still want you here. Anyway, so he says, I said, look, I have a friend saving seats for us. Just let us in. I'll sneak in. He says, the service has started, but you know what, sir? We have nice restaurants in the area. You can go find one. I was like, okay, thank you very much. We never went back. So when we started this church, I told our staff and I tell our ushers, no matter how late all of you come, everybody gets in. No matter how crowded it gets here, find them a seat. You know, like on Easter, Christmas, or even in August when school started, we were running out of chairs and they're grabbing benches from our playground. Everybody gets a seat here. I've had some of my staff come up to me like on an Easter and go, hey, Palmer, the place is really crowded. I see you're putting chairs in the aisles and I don't think the fire code allows that. I'm like, what? And they said, plus I think we are exceeding the limit of the room. We're breaking a fire code. And I just turn to my staff when they say, now who made you the fire marshal? You know, who died and left you in charge? Marshal, find a seat for him, sit him somewhere. But nobody gets turned down here. I think that's what community is supposed to be like. For the man on the mat, though, he must have been thinking, they don't want me on the inside because of my issues, because of my problems. Nobody wants me to touch them because my sin is contagious as anything. And the thing is, 2,000 years ago in Jesus' day, the most religious, their mark of being religious was by how much they excluded other people from their lives. And that was how you identified the most religious Pharisees or teachers of the law. They excluded, they wouldn't touch or come near sinners. The thing is, 2,000 years later, growing up, I have been in churches where it seemed like people operated on the same economy. They attended church a lot, and they memorized a lot of Bible verses, and they served on some committees, so they thought they were very spiritual. But their hearts were hard toward people who were different than them. Their hearts were hard toward people who needed Jesus Christ in their lives. And I want to say that for Jesus, I think, the most sure mark of being in community with him, the most sure mark of a follower of Jesus Christ is that you include and embrace everyone. So let's see what his friends do here to get him from the outside to the inside. Verse 19. When the friends could not find a way to get in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on the mat through the tiles and into the middle of the crowd. This is a determined group of friends. They're going to bust down walls, break through roofs, do anything to get their friend from the outside to the inside. And I love how we read they put him right in the middle of the room. This outsider is now an insider. That's how Jesus' community works for all of us. This circle of friends is sticking with him no matter what. In Christian community, I want you to know, and it should be the same in this place, you are never left on the outside. You are always wanted here. This church is your church. This church is here for you. This place is for you. This gathering is for you. I hope you get that. It's an incredible feeling, isn't it, when you walk into a place and people actually want you there. You feel wanted and welcome. It's a great feeling. When I say that, I think of the first church service that I went to in Santiago de Cuba. And I had taken a basketball team from my college ministry in Wheaton, Illinois. And by the way, Kyle Ray on our staff was on this trip. And we went to a worship service at a church, and it's in the evening, and there's a pile of high school students and college students, and I'm talking to the pastor who's hosting us, Pastor Joel, and I'm up in the front of the room, and he interrupts me, and he says, Palmer, I need you to show you what's happening back here. He says, do you see your basketball players are greeting all of the high schoolers? And in Cuba, he said, we greet with a kiss, but Palmer, it's an air kiss, and your basketball players are planting big smooches on the girls' cheeks, and now they're getting back in line to get greeted again. So we need to put a stop to this madness. And so that's how the church service started. And then one of my basketball players said, Palmer, I just finished 4 semesters of Spanish. Let me give the greeting. I said, all the power to you. So he gets up front, he takes a microphone, and he wants to start by saying, I'm very nervous. Estoy nervioso. But instead of saying estoy nervioso, he says, estoy novio, which means I am your boyfriend. And the girls cheered, and we felt so wanted and welcome there. Everybody loved being there. Anyway, that's maybe how church should be. More seriously, though, I love church in Cuba. I can't lie to you. Whether it was in Havana, I went to over a dozen churches in Santiago de Cuba, Havana, and every time you walk through the doors of the church, you see the same thing. It looks like a meeting of the United Nations. Because, and I've said this before, you go to church and it looks like there are people from every continent on earth have gathered in this place. Of every background, it looks like of every race, of every, it just looks that way in Cuba. Every church service I ever went to, and it seemed like heaven. It felt, and I want you to know, when we started the Grove, this has always been one of our core values, that we are doing our best, and we're trying every week to make this a place where every person, regardless of your past, regardless of your baggage, regardless of your mat, we want people in this place gathering together as one, of every ethnicity, of every nationality, of every immigration status, of every race. You're wanted here. This place is for you. We can applaud that. Thank you. And so if you have felt like an outsider in other places, I hope that as you dive into community at the Grove, you know that you're meant to be an insider here. I want to share one last thought with you this morning, and it's this, that in community that is Christian, friends carry each other to Jesus. And we read this in verse 20. When Jesus saw their faith, when he saw the faith of their friends, he said, friend, your sins are forgiven. It's such an interesting line that he sees 4 or 6 sweaty guys up in the roof. He's looking up and he sees their faces, and they're anxious and they're dusty and dirty and they're hot and tired. But he looks up and he says, because of their faith, because of the faith of the man's friends, your sins are forgiven. Do you see why I say that friends carry each other to the feet of Jesus? I was in another church years ago, and speaking of basketball, I started a basketball league for guys. And I told the captains when we started the league, I said, now, when you form your teams, make sure you invite some guys from work or from your neighborhood or maybe a cousin or somebody, but invite people that don't have a church home, or even better, don't even know Jesus Christ. And so our basketball team's filled with guys from all kinds of backgrounds. I finally had to tell the refs to stop throwing so many technicals for the swear words, okay? We just try, hey, you're in church. This is a church gym. Anyway, so we tried to put it, but it was so on my team, I invited a guy named Mike, and Mike was from down the street, and as far as I know, he hadn't been to church much at all. And after our third game, I remember walking out to the parking lot in the dark with him, and he stops me and he says, hey, Palmer, this has been really good playing on this team. And when you play sports with guys, and I'm sure this happens with girls too, I don't know much about this, but it's like a band of brothers, all right? You just feel like you're in this together. And he says, hey, Palmer, would it be okay if I came to church with you on Sunday? And I was like, oh, we usually don't allow that. And I said, of course, Mike, come to church. So he comes and he brings his whole family with him. And then about 4 weeks later, we're out in the parking lot again. He said, hey, Palmer, I've been wanting to tell you this last Sunday, I prayed to receive Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. He hadn't missed a Sunday since that first time. And then a few weeks later, he stopped me again and he said, my whole family now has accepted Christ. And he said, by the way, we have 2 kids, but my girlfriend and I have been together for 10 years. We've never been married. Would you perform our wedding for us? So I get to not just have a new friend and invite someone into community. I get to perform his wedding ceremony. My point is that in community that is Christian, God uses it to bring us toward him. Maybe today, you don't have those kinds of friends. You don't have that kind of community. Maybe today your friends are carrying you far away from Jesus Christ. And I want to say maybe you don't need those friends so much in your life anymore. If I were to ask you who today is carrying you closer to Christ, maybe you don't have that circle of friends. Maybe it's time to dive into community here. If I said, who's holding on to the corners of your mats? Could you give us names? Who is praying for you when you have the worst day ever? That's what happens in community. So let's see how the story ends. Verse 24. Then he said to the paralyzed man, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. Immediately the man stood up in front of them, took what he had been laying on, and he went home praising God. The man becomes a brand new person. His life, he had been known for being the man with the mat. Now he was the man who was free of the mat. And I don't know what you need to be free of today, but I want you to know that this community is for you. This church is for you. And Jesus' invitation is always this. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what's happened in your life. I want you to come now, to come from being on the outside. Maybe you've been a skeptic. Maybe you've been a doubter. But today is your day to step inside. This place is for you.